Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. I'm Billy Embody. Thanks for joining us. A bye-week edition, mainly recruiting focused for you guys on the Mustangs and what they're doing on the recruiting trail. The coaching staff hits the recruiting trail this week to see some of their top targets as well as commitments. We'll cover a lot of that as well as what's next in 2026 and beyond for SMU on this Friday edition of the podcast that starts right now.
When you clock in every day, there's always that chance that something can happen. You don't know when, where, or how, but accidents are inevitable. As a business owner, you don't want to be left holding the bag whether something happens to an employee or customer. General liability insurance covers everything from a slip or fall all the way down to a paper cut. At Northwest Insurance Agency, we will get you any necessary coverage that pertains to your field. So get covered under the sombrero by calling 855-88-75656 or visit us at nwagencies.com.
This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at ontheponyexpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody.
1, 2, 3, let me go.
Happy Friday, everyone. Hope you guys have a great bye week. And of course, make sure you guys reach out to our friend Northwest Insurance Agency with Mark Villasana leading the way, 214-352-5656, or email him info@nwagencies.com to get all the latest on how he can help you in the world of insurance, as it is a complicated time. So make sure you have the right rates and coverage for your personal life, business, and beyond. So SMU bye week wrapping up here on the football side of things. The program will have a walkthrough on this Friday and really getting into that Syracuse prep. You know, earlier this week, went through some practices. They were able to be viewed by the media. And for this SMU team, it's a time to kind of get right. But that's both in technique, that's both in fundamentals, that's on the injury front as well. And we updated a few injuries for our subscribers at ontheponyexpress.com and encourage you guys to subscribe for just $1 for your first week. But really where they need to get a lot better is those fundamentals. And that's what a lot of this week was certainly spent on. And for SMU, they've really done a good job coming out of the bye week in the Rhett Lashlee era. Now, this is a kind of a different beast, the way they've gotten to this bye week and the form that they've looked at, in my opinion, just because if you look at the 2023 team, which is what's going to draw a lot of comparisons to this situation when you are 2-2, two hard-fought games against Power 4 opponents. Granted, that was when you were G5. That was second year of the program for Rhett Lashlee. This is a group that, while coming off of their first year in the ACC, is a little bit more athletically and physically able to have won those games, which we know that. And I don't want to get back into that. But for this actual SMU team, they are still very new for the most part. We've seen other teams this year obviously have success and look very settled into what they're doing after a bunch of changes. You know, notably Florida State is one that comes to mind. Miami went through another change, including at the quarterback position, and looks to be, you know, the class of the ACC. But Georgia Tech is probably the best example of what SMU is building towards. You know, they've got a veteran quarterback. They even lost some guys to the transfer portal, but Brent Key and that staff, the way they've reloaded and built and have a steady foundation now, that's kind of what you're looking for from SMU in, you know, let's say ACC play this year, but certainly in the years beyond, where they can go out to a Colorado and win in a hard-fought game, and one that really, I mean, you know, Georgia Tech escaped with a win there. But you want to see that type of a level of consistency that they can perform in some of those situations just outside of what we saw last year. Obviously, you know, being able to beat TCU, they still fell to BYU at home. But when you look at what SMU has put together, they're trying to get to kind of that level of consistency against these Power 4 opponents in the non-conference in particular. For whatever reason, it hasn't gone that well for Rhett Lashlee. This is still, and Rhett talks about it a lot, a program that is building, and they're building towards the future. And I can tell you, we'll talk about it later on this podcast, the future and what SMU is trying to do is very deliberate. It is focused on the recruiting trail. And that is where they really want to make things happen. And look, there's a lot of studies that go into all of this as far as recruiting and roster building. And I think there's a lot of still figuring out, where do you spend your dollars? How do you spend your dollars? Who do you spend your dollars on? All of those things are really important as colleges work with their own cap and their own money that they can now go out and offer to prospects and transfers. And it is unique, and some guys every year are going to be overpaid. Some are going to be underpaid. That's the beauty of managing your roster and trying to mitigate risk so the dollar does go the farthest it can. Now, this year has been quite the run of a couple of programs, obviously stepping up to the plate for this uncapped year. In the future, we'll get a chance to see what all that looks like, what gets through the clearinghouse, what doesn't. But there's a lot of misconceptions out there as far as roster building goes, but none of that impacts this SMU team right now. And it really doesn't. They have been dealt the cards that they're dealt on the injury front. They have, certainly a lot of players to get healthy. Again, we covered that on the site. But when you look at this roster right now, it's probably a little imperfect for this single season. And it's about this SMU staff trying to find all the ways that they can to get through to these players. How do we pull the best situation for the players out of what the current roster has to offer, both from a health perspective and a fit perspective? And talking with the defensive staff, there's a lot of changes, not a lot. There are some big changes going on in the secondary that are going to be apparent right away against Syracuse when SMU takes the field against the Orange. And we're going to find out fairly quickly how well they have played out. And notably, SMU is moving Deuce Harmon to the nickel spot. And when you look at Deuce Harmon, he's been a starter at corner for SMU the last 2 years now. He's somebody that came in from Texas A&M and really, I think, and I don't think, SMU said this as well. He took very much an adjusting period when he got to SMU. He did not live up to the expectations of, truthfully, what they brought him in for as far as a defensive player. When they brought him in from Texas A&M, he was supposed to be kind of this perfect fit, come back to Dallas situation. And when you look at Deuce Harmon and what he has been able to do, it took him a minute to get lined up in that right frame of mind to produce for SMU last year. And he came on as the year went on, I felt like. And, when you see him, playing now, it is a different defensive back than what SMU saw early in the season last year. And look, the secondary has not necessarily been good at all. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to put lipstick on a pig, but the reality is Deuce Harmon has been playing some pretty good football. He played really well against TCU, was really highly graded, was targeted 3 times, 1 reception was credited to him. It was just for 7 yards. That's a pretty good line. Against Baylor, he was targeted 10 times, 5 receptions, 75 yards with the long of 28. So kind of Baylor just worked him a little bit. And I remember a lot of them kind of being those hitches. And then, also had 2 PBUs in that game. So he's kind of been more consistently making plays, but there's obviously that Baylor game that was bad for everybody as well. But for him to be targeted 10 times and give up 75 yards is not the worst thing in the world in a sense, especially when you have that kind of albatross out there of that 28-yard long reception that they had. So Deuce Harmon moves to nickel. He played in the box. He played a little nickel slot at Texas A&M. It is something that they've messed around with at times over the course of his time here. And SMU does that because they've got to have guys ready to go in certain situations. And Kyron Chambers has really been somebody that they now are saying, okay, he has to give something. He has to be a bigger box type of nickel, or something else has to happen there. And so Kyron Chambers, I mean, I give him credit. He is always out there working on his craft. He was out there again on the Wednesday practice, and he was in the indoor just by himself working on different drops. And then we went out there on Thursday, and he's doing the same thing. So that's where, like, it's hard because Kyron Chambers hasn't lived up to where he was in the spring, but he is sitting there just doing his best to try and work it and make it happen. So it's a tough deal for some of these guys, as they try to, figure out how they can best help this team. But Deuce Harmon is going to move to the slot, and in part because Lamadrick Spencer is banged up now with the hamstring pull. So we will see where he ends up going in that regard. But with that hamstring pull for Lamadrick Spencer, it certainly throws the nickel position in a little bit of a jolt there. So before we continue on with breaking down the rest of the secondary, do want to remind you, statusjet.com. Reach out to David Henry and his team for that round trip discount. When you mention On the Pony Express, they'll get you taken care of with that discount and make sure your trip is exactly how you want it to go. They will, make sure they can help you with different experiences. They can help you with get into the right plane. And there's no line of credit or big membership fee. This is just, hey, we want to go to SMU Clemson, or we want to go to SMU Duke in January. Let's book it through StatusJet and pay the bill, have a great time, and move on. So again, mention On the Pony Express and get a discount with a round trip flight with our friends at StatusJet. And with that move with Deuce Harmon going to nickel, you now have a cornerback room that is going to rely on Jalen Davis Robinson, and they're going to rely on Speedy Nettles, and they're going to rely on Marcellus Barnes, and maybe, just maybe, a true freshman somehow steps up, Zay Gentry, Jay Holly, those guys. Maybe that would be kind of a longer play deal. But for SMU, I mean, at this point, and look, Jalen Davis Robinson is rightfully going to get a lot of attention because of the 2 70-plus yard touchdowns off missed tackles from him against TCU that are ultimately the difference in the game. And you have to make those tackles. Like, you are a veteran. You've played a ton of snaps. You have got to make those tackles. And that's just the day and age that we live in of, hey, these guys are getting paid. I think it's fair that you can kind of, I don't think it's fair to be nasty about it, but if you're a fan, you could sit there and say, he's got to make the tackle. He's there. And so it's unfortunate that, those plays are certainly going to draw a lot of attention. And Smoke has not been somebody who, in my opinion, has been overly consistent, but he's been somebody that, certainly probably plays better than people give him credit for. But it's those big plays it's those consistency. It's the, giving up explosive plays that you just can't do in today's day and age of college football. And whether you're a veteran type of player or you're a young player. And so that's something he's got to get cleaned up. But Scott Simons, kind of passionately doubled down on him, saying, he clamped down TCU for 3 quarters. And, you can go back and run through kind of the whole, game and try to get the all 22 or do this or do that. This coaching staff has, obviously they have eyes. I'm not trying to, say that they're just BSing people and saying, hey, this is how it is or whatever, and you can make your own judgment. But this is what they're telling us in the media. And against TCU, you have a guy in Jalen Davis Robinson who was targeted 7 times, gave up 4 receptions for 150 yards. 2 of those are those massive plays. And then the third touchdown that he was credited for is actually one where Josh Hoover kind of got out of the pocket, scrambled. It was the one where he was drilled, and it was just kind of lobbed up there on 3rd and long. And Isaiah Wacobia was there too, and it just kind of fell asleep. That type of a coverage, situation is been kind of shared with me that it's it's a tough one to get credited to Jalen Davis Robinson is what I'm trying to say there. But you know, they didn't really go after him that many times, and one of the other times that they did, he gets interception. So it's certainly one where, look, this coaching staff has, the ISO film, they've got the all 22, and I think Jalen Davis Robinson has certainly deserved some attention and for that tackling. But and Scott, if you watch his 12-minute, almost 20-minute, I guess, interview on the Pony Express, you can see it sometimes when coaches are BSing you and things like that, but he was pretty kind of almost bristled about it, and in terms of, talking about it, like you could tell it bothered him that people are thinking a certain way about Jalen Davis Robinson right now. And at the same time, knowing he's got to make those tackles, and those are the difference in the ball game. And that's where the staff has to manage these guys so that their confidence can stay high, so that they get back to work on the fundamentals. Again, Smoke has played a lot of football for this team. At the same time, Speedy Nettles, Marcellus Barnes, they need more reps. And we'll see how this experiment goes, moving Deuce Harmon in to the nickel spot. And especially with Lamadrick Spencer, banged up right now with his hamstring injury. So it's a really corners in today's college football. If you give up the big play, that's a huge indictment, in my opinion, on you as a corner, right? Like, that's why that type of stuff can't happen. That it just can't. And so for SMU, they've got to find a way to get Smoke to be a little bit more consistent as far as tackling goes. But we kind of went through this last year. That tackling piece for Jalen Davis Robinson, we talked about it last year when he was giving up some plays in non-conference play. That tackling piece, he was one of the highest graded tacklers on SMU's team. And that's part of why they're out there. The inability for receivers, for the most part, to get yards after catch is critical for this cornerback group. That's one of the things, that's one of the staples of an SMU defense over the last 2 years. We've not seen it as much this year, but they've got to be able to tackle, and that limits the big plays. And at times this year, the tackling has not been good, and that has allowed big plays. I mean, that's where it's at. So he will either clean it up, or they will ultimately be forced to make another decision on that front. But, when you look at Jalen Davis Robinson, he's been one of the better tacklers at the corner position. They've got to figure out a way to make sure he gets back to that and then work from there. But it's a hard thing to kind of walk at the corner room. I've said it on the board. So for those of you who are probably in the comments thinking he's just defending this, defending that, SMU should have gone after another corner. I mean, they should have. But at the same time, if you told me, hey, Marcellus Barnes here, we feel really, really good about him coming in, competing, shoring up this corner room after he played as a true freshman for Fran Brown, and then we're going to bring back Deuce Harmon and Jalen Davis Robinson, and we like where Speedy Nettles is going, I would have said, and Zay Gentry was just coming off a big senior year. Like, Jay Holly played a bunch of big time football. Who am I to argue, But I think corner is a room that for SMU, and Jonathan McGill talked about it on a few podcasts ago, when you don't have a Charles Woods or a Chris Megginson or just both, it is going to show up in coverage eventually. And that's the hard part for SMU is they have been looking for that type of shutdown corner, and they've still got a kind of a long way to go to find it. And maybe it's something that, when a Deuce Harmon rolls off the roster next year, they go out and they find another one. So it's an intriguing situation to be in. But I thought the most intriguing piece of that was Scott Simons doubling down and really, really, really defending Jalen Davis Robinson, which is what I expect from him. But I think the validity of how he went about it is what piques my interest, as far as, just he didn't have to do that. He could just say, we believe in Smoke and blah, blah, blah. But when he kind of gets animated a little bit for Scott to do that, it tells me there's a little bit more behind it in what they're seeing and what they're watching on the full tape and the ISO tape on a guy like Jalen Davis Robinson. So secondary is a huge talking point this week in the bye week, but we will see. They're going to face a Ricky Collins quarterback who, I've seen a lot of Ricky over the course of his high school and college career. We'll see if he can be Steve Angeli. I'm not sure he's going to be able to do it. Of course, at the same time, SMU secondary has been porous this year. So there's something's got to give there when the Orange come to town and face SMU. So we'll be tracking that. Speaking of tracking, talk about our new sponsor, Socorro, with the product drop. And this is the Añejo bottle, just beautiful bottles, first of all. So they make a great gift as well. We'll have them out on the boulevard with us. And of course, you can also have it at Manny's. Tex-Mex, our friends at Manny's do have Socorro back there as well. So you can enjoy it there with your margarita. I had a margarita this weekend, I was saying, and I asked for Socorro. And it's just clean, really smooth. One of our resident experts at On the Pony Express on the tequila front, Smarter Budweiser, which is kind of funny considering he's the man with tequila, gave it a pretty good score in his mind from what he researched. So he's looking forward to getting into it. But the Añejo is something I'm looking forward to trying. I haven't tried it yet. The Blanco is what I've been rolling with right now. I actually made the part of the reason why I have the Añejo right here is last night I made margaritas. I said, hey, we're trying to be a little bit better and not just cracking a beer. We're trying to be a little bit more conscious on that front. So made a margarita. I'm sure some people are like, there's probably sugar in there. You're just wasting your time. But for us, it feels cleaner, feels better. And when you have a high quality tequila like Socorro, it makes all the difference. And it was really, really just refreshing last night to enjoy a homemade margarita with our friends at Socorro. So make sure you guys find them at your local liquor store or again at our friends at Manny's. They've got them. They're around town in DFW and beyond. So please support them. They're the official tequila of SMU, and we look forward to doing some big things with our friends at Socorro. All right, let's get into the recruiting side of things. And so this week is a big one for SMU because they do get to go out on the road, and you'll see if you are on theponyexpress.com the rundown on kind of where the coaching staff is going. But Casey Woods, offense coordinator, got a chance to go out and see Andre Nickerson, the tight end commitment in the state of California. He's a big body guy. And I was talking with a source about high school recruiting. I'll kind of go into this in a little bit, and I'm not going to try to give all the secrets away and things like that of what SMU is trying to do here. But tight end is a position that SMU has to hit on in the high school ranks. They need RJ Maryland. Obviously RJ is panned out from the high school ranks, but you need a Miles Uter. You need a Zach Turner and Andre Nickerson to pan out. Even Trip Reardon, and I say that just because I was not expecting him to be out there in a sense, but Trip Reardon needs to step up in the later part of his career. You have Adam Moore, who is starting to put things together as well, and has seen some time. So those guys are high school players. The vast majority of players that get drafted at the tight end position, high school guys, very, very few transfers. So you have got to make sure that you hit on these evaluations. And for Casey Woods, he's going to have one in Andre Nickerson, who they love, and Zach Turner at Duncanville, who they're also high on coming in this class of 2026. But last night, Casey Woods was among the coaches out on the road, and he went and saw their tight end commitment, Andre Nickerson. One other one that SMU went out and saw, and if you want to go find it on our YouTube channel, is the story we did on Papunga Katoa. Friday night, I think Friday, might have been Thursday, but Friday night, I'm just going to say last week, Ricky Hunley, SMU defensive backs coach, and offensive line coach Garen Justice were out watching Trinity Euless play. Of course, Papunga Katoa is out there for them. Big offensive line commit for SMU that the Mustangs beat out. And it's funny how, we get away from the summer and we forget some of these recruiting battles, beating out Oklahoma, Texas A&M for Papunga Katoa. Really, really nice addition for SMU, but he also has a 5-star teammate in John Meredith III. really talented player, top 10 prospect nationally, number 2 corner in the country in the class of 2027. So SMU got out there and was able to watch him and that Trinity team, which is really, really talented. And, this is the position, I think, that, and I'm not I'm not saying this as in SMU is going to get John Meredith. I think he is going to have, and I think he's worth it, but he's also one that I think could maybe go through a little bit of maturing, just from my conversations with him. He's just kind of a jokester, and I don't even mean it as like, quote unquote old man here, yelling at the clouds type of thing, but it just seems like he just needs to mature, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. So when you're looking at investing in some of these players, that is the hard part of evaluating them and trying to figure out, what works in as far as the revenue share and the contracts that are going to go out to him at some point. And that's where a lot of coaches will certainly have an opportunity to make an impression. And I think for SMU, they've been able to win some of these big recruiting battles because they've put together good contract situations for these players. And John Meredith is one that's certainly going to demand it. We will see if he ends up, getting back to SMU again, but has been somebody who's been around a little bit on campus so far over the course of his career. And of course now has another tie to the campus with Papunga Katoa locked in with his commitment. And look, this 2027 class is a big one for me when evaluating high school recruiting at the corner position. And I mentioned having Deuce Harmon roll off the books, so to speak, by then, but that's for 2026. That's already going to be gone. Deuce is, at least. And then Jalen Davis Robinson will be gone. Marcellus Barnes will be in his senior year. All things, stay the same. And then you've got the younger guys who will be in the kind of the prime of their college career, as far as continuing to develop and be on campus for a year in the case of the 2026 class. But this 2027 class is where SMU needs to take that next step, and a 5-star or 2 is what you never expect 5 stars. So first of all, let me say that. But it would be really, really smart of SMU to go after high school players at certain premium positions and get the 5-star. And we're dropping an update on this Friday on where SMU is going as far as the offensive line, and one of them, big target, 5-star. They're going out to see him, and that's the type of player that you need. And I think at corner, you can say, here's the thing about corner, and I would love to go back and forth on this with somebody, because you can find skill position players in the transfer portal fairly easily. And like even SMU, I mean, as much grief as you want to give the corners at times, you can't say you didn't necessarily like get your burn out of what you spent on those players to come here. And, Marcellus Barnes, obviously needs to step up and get more comfortable in the system and all those things. But I will say, if you go out and get a 5-star corner and he hits, you have somebody for 3 years that, you're going to pay him a bunch of money, but you're also going to have one side of the field locked down. Like LSU has DJ Pickett right now, true freshman, top 10 player, number 1 corner. And it helps when you can just lock down one side of the field. It helps. I mean, I know I'm, stating the obvious here. So I look at it as a money saving piece. So if you bring in a John Meredith, let's say, and he was able to be at that level in 2027 and start right away and overtake somebody, first of all, a 5-star corner overtaking, some vets on a team isn't a bad thing. But when you look at what then you could plan, if you say, okay, John Meredith is signing with us, we're going to keep, he's signed his letter of intent. Who knows? Maybe guys sign before their senior years, even at that point. Maybe they change the rules. But when you see these players that could come in and shut down one side of the field like that, you can say, okay, I'm not saying go cheap on corner, but then you can kind of tilt it in a different way where, all right, we're going to have John Meredith and he's going to be our stud and he's going to play 80, 90 snaps. We might have a young guy we're developing who plays a handful of snaps here and there behind him. But then the other side is going to be like two solid guys and they can rotate and be fresh. And then that other solid guy on the other side could, be a part of the solution of spelling a John Meredith. Like, having an elite corner and then two solid ones is a better situation than, in my opinion, than having four solid corners, if that makes sense to anybody out there listening to this still. And that's why I think when you look at John Meredith, and Ricky Hundley was also out Thursday night this week watching another one of SMU's top targets in Montre Jackson, the Lakeview Centennial prospect, who is a 4-star prospect and a very, very good corner in his own right. First of all, both of these guys are 6'1" and above, which I love. Go out and get some size. I think that is something that SMU has kind of missed here in the recruiting world of the corner position. But this is a Rivals 300 prospect. I think he checks the boxes mentally from a mental makeup as well. So I think SMU should kind of go in on certainly John Meredith, but Montre Jackson is very, very good in his own right too. So keep an eye on those two. Those are two corners. This has been a very safety this has been a very heavy secondary podcast. But look, that is kind of the talking point of this bye week for sure. So look, do want to remind you guys before we continue on, check out the Thomas Auto Group. Head up 75 McKinney, visit any of their 4 dealerships across the McKinney area: Ford, Subaru, Volkswagen, and Mitsubishi. Got my wife's car all set up to go in on Monday and get the bumper fixed. So looking forward to having a firsthand experience. Well, not looking forward to it, but I know they're going to take great care of us at the collision center. So we'll report back on the experience there as well. But Thomas Auto Group, they will give you employee pricing on new and pre-owned vehicles when you mention On the Pony Express.
At Thomas Auto Group, the Thomas Promise includes the low price promise,
the pre-owned promise,
and the 72-hour exchange promise.
and finally, the 100% customer satisfaction promise. So shop Thomas Auto Group today, home of the Thomas Promise.
That's right, the Thomas Promise. And of course, I do want to remind you guys again, October 1st, Wednesday, we'll be at the Manny's location in Lakewood on Mockingbird. Make sure you say queso to any of your Manny's locations across DFW. There's 4 of them. You get 10% off your food order when you say queso. Call the manager over there if you need to. If somebody, maybe didn't get the memo, just say queso gets me 10% off my order with Manny's Tex-Mex. Can't do it on the booze per laws, but the food, you get 10% off. We will be at Manny's Tex-Mex on Wednesday, October 1st during the lunchtime at the Lakewood location. And then we'll do happy hour at the Plano location at Coit and Campbell, celebrating their kickoff for Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation fundraiser that they're doing with their Komen Ritas. $1 for every Komen Rita goes to breast cancer research with the Susan G. Komen Foundation. So really cool deal there. All of October going on. So support our friends at Manny's. And again, you can just say, hey, can I get a Komen Rita with Socorro in it? So great time to do that. All right, let's kind of go here, because we'll put where the staff is going at on theponyexpress.com. So hopefully you guys subscribe and check that out and get the lowdown. I'm looking at my notes here, and it's a big list and some key targets for SMU. Here's something I want to talk about and kind of talked a little bit about it, I guess, in a roundabout way in the recruiting side of things. But in 2026, this is where we're going to see coaching firings impact SMU recruiting. And you're going to see some players now get its open season on Virginia Tech, UCLA, Oklahoma State. You could argue it's open season on Florida. It is a just bad situation at those programs, and a lot of colleges are going to look to take advantage of it. By the way, one of the first decommits I've seen in a minute from Clemson happened last night. I think Dre Quinn, a defensive back, decommitted. He might have been an edge or something, but he decommitted from Clemson. So things are going to get shaken up. Here's what I believe, because recruiting is never a I know situation for the most part. SMU's commitments are solid. They've got a top 25 class. SMU's pretty good at obviously keeping them all intact. Last year we saw them had to fight off TCU for Tyron Polley, Baylor for Zay Gentry. Some of these other programs were lurking around. Auburn was lurking for Draymond Odoms late, and they kept him. They were able to, keep pretty much, I think, that entire class from, flipping and things like that once they got past the summer, which is the key point. You want your class locked up by the end of the summer. Now is the fun part where SMU can go and evaluate some of these and reevaluate some of these players that they've been recruiting for a minute. You see them as seniors, their coach gets fired, that they're committed to. Now it's time to make that push. And that's what SMU is going to do here. So I say that and say, keep an eye on that, and we'll see who ends up showing up over the course of the rest of the season as SMU hosts home games and gets these recruits on campus. So keep an eye on that. Again, subscribe for just $1 for your first week. And then when you do an annual subscription, you get a complimentary year of The Athletic included with your ontheponyexpress.com subscription. So check that out. It's worth it. If you have an Athletic subscription, you can cancel it and use the On the Pony Express one. So great deal there. But when the staff evaluates the overall future of this roster, right? You have to know what the trends say. Like, you have to be able to sit there and also say, here's what we want to do. Like, SMU has made a concerted effort to recruit the high school ranks well. Like I said, in 2027, I think it's time that they need to figure out a 5-star. The place to spend that money is at an offensive lineman spot. It's at a defensive lineman. Those are the spots. Those are the key pieces. And I know there are people on the board saying, like, of course, like, duh. But there is a different world that we're living in now in terms of roster acquisition and roster building. And you can look in the NFL draft, because that's what SMU wants, right? SMU wants NFL draft players. And there are some players on the roster that ultimately are going to move on at some point because, they were recruited in the past or whatever. And it's a different world for SMU being in the ACC now. It's a different level of player that they could acquire. And the goal, though, is to find guys that can get to the NFL. And at some spots, you could argue, Scott Simons doesn't care how tall a safety is. Tyron Polley's 5'11" or so, maybe 6 foot, maybe. But Scott Simons doesn't care, because Tyron Polley is somebody he thinks is going to be a beast. He's going to be a massive playmaker. Ahmad Moses is 5'10" or so. I don't know his exact, but they don't care at the safety position. They want really good college football players. But there are certain spots that you've got to nail in high school, because there are, at the offensive line position, few Logan Parrs, PJ Williams. Now, you could make the argument at offensive line that there's 5 positions across the offensive line. It's the most across any football team, unless you run 5 wide receivers the entire time. So there's more jump shots up on transfers that transfer and don't pan out. But for the large majority of NFL draft picks, it's high school players. And so you've got to be cognizant of that. For quarterback, it's flipped. You have over 75% of quarterbacks in the last 2 NFL drafts were transfers. So you got to be smart when you're going to invest in a high school quarterback. You really got to be smart. Like, either you go for Bryce Underwood, or maybe you just take a solid quarterback. Try to develop him. Rhett Lashlee's done a good job of developing quarterbacks. Go from there. Skill positions, seems like you can get anything you want in the transfer portal. But in terms of spending and putting your money in the right places, the offensive line, defensive line, that's where SMU is going to push here over the course of the 2027 class. They will have to, you look at the future of this offensive line, and Alex Woods has been banged up. He was supposed to be really the backup left guard this year. Nate Anderson is filled in there when Logan Parks come out. You need that next step on the offensive line. And that's why this class was so important. Getting guys like Papunga Katoa, getting guys like Drew Evers, getting guys like Evan Goodwin. Those are important key building blocks of the future for this offensive line. Those are the pieces that will eventually, you say in 2027, really take the reins and hit it. Addison Nichols has 2 years. That's a positive. That's a huge deal. So there's a lot of discussions this bye week for SMU around where things are going with roster building, where their money is best spent. But don't sit there and try to think that they aren't focused on what the actual numbers say as well, on where people should spend their money. And that's one thing about this team where they might figure out some of those things that they need to change and tweak as far as roster construction. Like, I think the way that the high school recruiting at the defensive tackle position, I think, has jumped up. Dakota Dixon, Keith Doty, those are 2 really good players in my opinion. They might not be 4 stars, but they are big bodies. They move well. I like where they're going in that direction. They need to get a blue chip guy. And whether it's this cycle flipping somebody, or in 2027, you figure out a way to get some of this top talent. Remember, they've had like 10 4-star defensive tackles on campus this fall for the 2027 class. So it's a long way out, guys. Relax. We'll see. We'll be able to assess. Somebody on the board, I thought it was a great little exchange, talking about, Jaquan Snell, saying, A&M sounds like home and this is a safety, but, and the quote was, is SMU eternally A&M's little brother? And I just responded with the Drew Evers quote about his official visit, jumping up the list. The recruiting is weird. Words don't necessarily mean all that much. You got to track the visits and who's actually interested in your program from those. Who makes it to game day? Who makes it to game day multiple times? Who makes it to that first junior day? Who makes it back, obviously, for another visit during spring ball? And then who makes it for an official visit? Those are all things that are important to track as we go through this. And that's what's going to make the 2027 class, I think, the most fun to follow. Because we've seen SMU be in on multiple top 50 prospects, top 100, Rivals 300. That's the good thing. That's the exciting thing. And there are some that are ultimately not going to go SMU's way, but I bet you they figure out the best way to assemble a class that is in the top 25 safely and fills needs and doesn't overspend at positions that literally tell you, numbers wise, don't overspend there. Don't overspend there. Unless you go get Bryce Underwood. Which even then, Michigan's not lighting the world on fire. It's a different system. But spend wisely. Spend wisely. And SMU is able to jump out in front of this 2027 class. And I think it's their statement one. If you're looking for a bold prediction to kind of end this podcast on, SMU gets a top 20, top 15, maybe even recruiting class in 2027. It's my early bet. We'll see. They've got some things to clean up. They've got some things to refine. There's always going to be some certain spots that SMU isn't going to go, star chase or whatever. But it would not shock me if they ended up with a top 15 class. So, hope you guys have a great weekend. Again, support our sponsors, Northwest Insurance Agency. Give Mark Villasana a call, 214-352-5656. Support Socorro Tequila when you're sipping it, watching some football this weekend. Check out Manny's, say queso, 10% off. Statusjet.com, mention On the Pony Express for a discount on a round-trip flight. And Thomas Auto Group, On the Pony Express gets you employee pricing on new and pre-owned vehicles. And last, but certainly not least, reach out to Andy Ludicky, our friend at myperfectfranchise.net, 404-973-9901. Andy, A-N-D-Y, at myperfectfranchise.net. He will get you consulted on the franchise world. It's free, his services, to consult you on what you should do with franchises and franchise ownership. Andy Ludicky can help you through that and get you in the right situation for you and your family. So reach out to our friend Andy Ludicky and have him consult with you on franchise ownership and how it can change your life. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and we will catch you guys next time on another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU on 3 and on Instagram at on3SMU. And keep it locked to ontheponyexpress.com for more coverage.